Do 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 do. How can we be so calm? Week 15. 3 games in the book. Dr. Gene Bramwell is on assignment, but we do have his insight. Those of you who are Football Guy subscribers also have his insight through the injury rounds. And I've got Matt Waldman with me. And it's a little conflict of interest here as Matt and I are facing each other in one final. You put some good points on the board against me, but I had one player go so far, and it was Marcus Peters. Yes,
Yep.
Marcus Peters. So we'll see. I actually have Marcus Peters going in all 3 of my IDP finals today. Let me go ahead.
If there's a difference, it'll probably be Marcus Peters having a good day and Justin Houston doing squat, who's done like everything for me in that league.
If it makes you feel better, I have Justin Houston going in a similar league for my team. So, but we don't care about those.
And if that one doesn't work out, then in the Football Guys staff redraft league, we might have a shot to face each other.
The OGs.
One of us might get payback.
We shall see. And you don't care that much about our teams, but you care about your teams. You care about so many things going on in week 15. And we don't have Dr. Gene here, but we are still going to go over some of these injury situations. And we got to start with Leonard Fournette. No Leonard Fournette. Okay. So it seems clear that Chris Ivory will start, but it also seems clear that I think that the split in the first 2 games without Fournette was basically a factor of 10-6, 5-3 in touches for Ivory. And I'm not sure how much we can rely on that. It seemed like for a little while the team was hemming and hawing between Ivory and Yeldon. We know the roles. Obviously, if this is a game that we expect them to control, that's maybe more of a 20-25 carry game for Ivory. If it's a game that we expect to be somewhat close, then maybe that's a little more work for Yeldon and hurry up offense or put the passing game against Houston. But it is Houston with TJ Yates. It's Houston with the banged up DeAndre Hopkins. That's a whole other story here. So it comes down to this, Matt. I think that we can say that TJ Yeldon is more of a desperation play. We're not getting into a lot of meaty questions of TJ Yeldon or, if you were in week 15 and somehow you ended up with your next best option after Fournette is Yeldon, then look, and just to give folks a flavor for this, like I would say I would play TJ Yeldon maybe over like Isaiah Crowell against Baltimore or Lamar Miller. I mean, they're all going to get like 15 touches, and maybe Yeldon's will be a little bit better. DeMarco Murray, is that fair?
It's fair consideration. I mean, while I probably would disagree with you on those guys, other than maybe even Lamar Miller, I might disagree.
But you're getting the scale. You're getting the scale out. You're getting the scale out, and that's
pretty good because I mean, when you look at it from this standpoint, it's like this. With Yeldon, you're absolutely right about how the game script's going to factor in with him. But one of the positive factors of if the Houston Texans play horribly and get behind early is that they might just say, you know what, we may need Ivory next week a little bit more. Let's rest him and put Yeldon and let him get enough carries to where, Ivory did enough and we don't have to, run him into the ground and we can save him for next week because we know Ivory's been a little brittle too.
Right. And then the talk is that Fournette will be back next week against San Francisco, although I really think that if they win this week and the Patriots win this week, which makes it much less likely, the Patriots would then have to slip up in one of their last 2 games against Buffalo and the Jets. If the Patriots get the bye and they're really looking at the 3 seed, then rest Fournette another week. And then if Tennessee slips up against the Rams and you have the division clinched and the number 3 seed clinched, then you get Fournette all rested up, 3 weeks of rest. And that's because obviously how they will go as far in the playoffs as the defense and Fournette can carry them. And the only reason I'm making that distinction in terms of comparison players, Matt, is after DeMarco Murray in my rankings, then you're looking at Rod Smith and Matt Forte and Wayne Gallman and Derrick Henry. And at that point, it's obvious. I mean, I think it's obvious you play TJ Yeldon over those guys.
Yeah.
And above TJ Yeldon were players like Carlos Hyde, right around TJ Yeldon, guys like Kerwin Williams, Jonathan Stewart. Where it gets tough, let's put it this way, where it gets tough with Yeldon is those guys that are going to get 15 touches, 18 touches. You're not sure the quality of those touches, but the volume's going to be there where you're not sure about Yeldon. Ivory, it gets a little bit tougher. Yep. Ivory, we get into a tier. Let's just talk about the players in this tier with Ivory. Okay. I suppose the Ivory tier starts with Jay Ajayi. and this is like our mid to low running back two tier. I'm gonna and I'm working my way down, so it's gonna be kind of obvious where Mike. So I think Ajay over Ivory. Are we gonna
Yeah,
put? Go
yeah.
ahead.
I mean, I can certainly see that. I mean, I think that you look at this, and the Giants have given up a good bit of yardage, to teams that want to run the ball, and you would think that they'd want to run the ball a little bit more in Philly. So I can certainly see him as a passable low end running back two ahead of Yeldon.
Latavius Murray over Ivory. It's no Vontae's perfect. It's a defense that just folded like a chair against Chicago, who we watched struggle to move the ball against Detroit yesterday afternoon. I'm playing Murray over Ivory. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I would continue with that.
I'm playing Alfred Morris over Ivory at
Yeah.
Oakland. Dallas should control that game. Um, where we're getting into like the coin flip zone. Okay, at this moment, and I have to really meditate on this. At this moment, so players are right in the vicinity of Ivory in my rankings right now, Matt. Dion Lewis or Chris Ivory.
Yeah, I can see where that's close. And I think the thing is that you're hoping for more touchdown potential from Ivory than what you're going to get from Lewis at the stripe. And I think that that's probably the thing. Lewis is a safer play
Yeah.
because you know what you're going to get out of him, whereas with Ivory, it's a wider range of variability. So I would lean Lewis, but I can see how it's
Yeah,
close.
I lean Lewis too. Marshawn Lynch against Chris Ivory, who the two is very if Chris Ivory has a spirit animal among the running backs, Marshawn Lynch is. I used to say Chris Ivory is like Marshawn Lynch if he was human, but Marshawn Lynch at this age on Oakland is kind of human.
Yeah, and also if I were to think of a team that's going to screw up a good thing, it would be the Oakland Raiders with Marshawn Lynch. I kind of look at after watching Marshawn Lynch the way that he's run, they're like, I don't know, they're like the person who's won like a lot of money and like more money that if they even saved like 5% of it, they'd be rich for the rest of their life. But they've decided that they're going to still be like clipping coupons and like living somewhere where that's like actually hurting them more than it's helping them as a human being. It just seems to me Oakland's been that stingy about using Marshawn Lynch that it's actually hurt them. I don't really they with what Cooper did this year and with what how Carr's played off and on, it just seems to me that you've got a guy early in games who's just like killing it, and then they take him out of the game, and it's
Yeah.
just like it's silly. I understand it's very close. I would probably still give the nod to Lynch, but that's because I don't know. We've been conditioned too long to think that he's still such a good fantasy play when he's in the
Yeah.
game. He just won't be in it enough,
And
probably.
I would give the nod to Lynch too right now, according to my rankings. I think Ivory might have a little bit higher ceiling than Lynch, but it's hard. So the next player I would compare with Ivory is one that I think I may have gotten more questions with this name in start sit than anybody else this week. Mike Davis. Mike Davis or Chris Ivory. And I think they're very similarly situated this week. You probably can pencil them in for 18, 20 touches, 16, 18 carries, 2 or 3 receptions. Now, the thing about Davis is he hasn't scored yet, but this is Seattle against the Rams. I would guess this game tilts more towards the offensive side. So, in addition to weighing Ivory and Davis, weigh in on Davis in general because I've gotten a ton of questions about him, and I think people aren't quite sure how to value him in this most important week.
Yeah, I'm starting Mike Davis against you this week, so it's a
Start Mike Davis, everybody.
but I'm starting Mike Davis, and I've had I wrote about Mike Davis in the gut check about a month and a half ago, talking about him. And when you look at this particular matchup, the Los Angeles Rams have been giving up a lot of yards on the ground. So you combine that with the fact that they're also a very aggressive group. So you've got Russell Wilson, who they're chasing after, and then Russell Wilson's gonna, make a couple of moves, make the flow of the defense change like at least one time, and then throw it back to a guy like Davis in the outlet who's going to have everybody running away from him. When he gets the ball, that's a recipe for big yardage for Mike Davis as an outlet receiver, and he has a great feel for it. And they were talking about earlier about there was a lateral that Russell Wilson tossed to Davis in the Philadelphia game that earned some yards, and apparently it was Davis who was calling for the ball. And so, you know, to have that rapport and to be the back who's like, not just like, I'm ready for it, but the one going, throw it, you know, that tells you a little bit about Davis and his play. And he's a hard runner. Honestly, when everyone's going to be all excited about Chris Carson coming back, I honestly think Mike Davis could easily beat Chris Carson from what I've seen on film from both guys. They're both good enough to play. But to me, when you look at this comparison with he and Ivory, the thing with Ivory is that you can see them having a Kareem Hunt game against a Houston Texans team that may just shut down in the way that the Chargers just weren't there. And it's like big holes opened up. And, you know, yeah, you run through a couple of tackles and they talk about that for a long while, but you're basically getting, you know, somewhere between 5 and 8 yards of runway before you even get touched on a lot of plays. That could happen for Ivory more likely than it will happen for Davis. But in reality, like that's the dream situation. And that's where I think Ivory's dream will sell a little higher than Mike Davis. But the reality of the situation is that Mike Davis will be involved in every play on a level where he's going to, you know, they're going to throw him the ball. They're going to run it to him. The line's playing a little bit better and this game will stay close and he'll be a factor whether they're close or not. So he's more game script proof, but Ivory is more likely to have the better game script with a higher output due to it. The chances for him to have a good game script is higher. So conservative folks, go with Davis. Folks who need a little more points, Ivory's your guy.
I think that's a wonderful way to sum up Chris Ivory today in general. He's got a higher ceiling and a lower floor. You know, J.D. McKissick is less of a threat to Mike Davis than T.J. Yeldon is to Chris Ivory. Ivory's more likely to get the dream game script at Jacksonville rolling over T.J. Yates and Houston at home. But let's also remember that Chris Ivory over the course of his career has not been the most durable. And I don't think it would shock anybody if we see Ivory calling the sidelines or limping off the field.
J.D. McKissick's more of a threat to T.J. Lock or to Lockett,
right?
Than he is to Mike Davis at this point.
Yeah. So and I'll wind up this Chris Ivory talk with a couple of my conditionals. Okay. Well, let me ask really quick. So this is kind of jumping ahead to previewing a game, but this is really tough, Matt. And I think we have been doing this long enough to say that when two teams that have nothing to play for are facing in December, it is very difficult to gauge where the game could go. It could be a blowout on either side, including the road team. Look at Chicago coming into Cincinnati last week and blowing them out. It can be a close game that is typified by offensive futility. It can be a close game that's typified by defensive futility. It can be really the range of outcomes for these games with two teams that have nothing to play for. Very difficult. Washington and Arizona. Samaje Perine. Where does Samaje Perine fit into this running back 2 picture we've been painting?
He fits fairly low, to be honest with you. Like I'm looking at your rankings now, and like I'd take Bernard, McCaffrey, McKinnon, Anderson, Barber, Stewart. I would probably start everyone but maybe TJ. I'd start him maybe over TJ Yeldon.
Right.
You know,
right.
And that's where I'm looking.
And I may be a little bit so the little tick and in PPR leagues, just to be clear, in PPR leagues, I have McCaffrey over Perine, and I'm Perine. The thing about Perine that's interesting to me is Byron Marshall's out, so I'm not even sure who they're going to throw the ball to out of the backfield. There's one potential theory about this game floating around that Arizona, when they've traveled east this year, has been terrible, but Arizona's been playing much better out of these two teams in the last few games. Although Arizona's had a tough time scoring touchdowns with Blaine Gabbert. All this leads me to think this will be more of an offensive futility game. However, we can agree that Ivory over Perine, and then in a PPR league, I have Giovanni Bernard and Christian McCaffrey over Ivory, and Jerick McKinnon and Ivory in a PPR league. It's just so close. What about the PPR specials? Bernard, McCaffrey, McKinnon.
Yeah, I mean, I think those guys I would put over Perine. I would definitely
over Ivory, though.
Yeah, I would probably.
I think it comes down to format. In PPR leagues, I'm looking at them. In non-PPR leagues, I'm probably going with Ivory.
I would probably say it just it's very close. So it's to me. I mean, I think that if you're it's that game script thing. So I mean, if you're betting, if you need points, it's still the same thing. If you need points and it's and it's high potential, you need that high ceiling, you get Ivory. If you need a high floor, you go with guys like Bernard and McCaffrey, and I'd say that's hidden. But I would probably take Ivory over McKinnon because of
Yeah.
Murray.
McKinnon and Murray are so tough because on one hand you have a clear split, like the clearest, closest to a 50-50 split we have in any backfield right now is
Right.
McKinnon and Murray. It's McKinnon and McMurray. But Vontae's Perfect is out, and last week a feeble Chicago offense was able to make Jordan Howard an elite running back one, and I think Tree Cohen still had like 85 total yards in that game on 13 touches. So it's just tough. It's tough. Last running back, and we'll wind up this running back two conversation is Ivory helps us bring a lot of these decisions or put them up for discussion. What about Peyton Barber? Because we don't know as of right now. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've had, and I don't expect Tampa before the games to come out and say Peyton Barber's going to start. He's outplayed Doug Martin again, and it seemed like last week as the game went on, they decided to go with Barber, and Barber looked like he deserves that. However, and the other good thing, if you want to get talked into Barber, is that they're playing at home on a Monday night, and we saw Miami, who had a little more to play for. Miami's actually still very much alive for the playoffs, but Tampa's not. But they are playing at home. It is honoring John Gruden night and so on. So if you want to build a theory that Tampa's going to play well and it's going to be a good game script for Barber against a divisional opponent. What do we think about Peyton Barber for this week with limited information on his role?
I mean, I just think I have to look at it this way. First, you just have to think about the situation that you're in and whether why you're considering Peyton Barber at this stage. If the reason is that, you're looking at him as a flex play and you don't have many other options among the guys that we've already discussed, then I get it. And at that point, I think it's a reasonable gamble to start him because you have to look at it this way. During the broadcast crew, Rondé Barber, and I don't remember who the Fox play-by-play man was, when they do their routine interviews with the teams during the week to get ready for this game, they asked Dirk Cutter about Doug Martin and Peyton Barber, and they said, Peyton Barber, they framed it basically in the sense that Peyton Barber's been playing really well. Is he now the starter? And Dirk Cutter's answer was, I don't think it's fair to give the starting job away from someone who's been hurt. So what that says to me is, I'm willing to give the starting job to Barber. It's not that he hasn't earned it, and it wasn't the Doug Martin is our starter, period. He's a star. How would we bench him, even though Peyton Barber's played great? It was, let's wait and see how Doug Martin does. Doug Martin kept trying a little too hard, like he's done throughout this season and a couple of years ago on a lot of plays, and he fumbled the ball at the end of the half, and after that, he was on the bench. So that tells me right there, if you don't come out in the second half, at the end of the first half, you're replaced and you don't play again for the second half. I think our new starter is Peyton Barber, and I think that you can take that chance and probably say that that's what's going to happen. And maybe Martin gets some carries, and if he gets hot, they may keep him in there. But I would probably start him. Maybe I'd start him behind. I'd put guys like Bernard ahead of him. But if you're looking at P. Ryan or Barber against this situation, P. Ryan may be guaranteed a few more carries. But I would start Barber probably ahead of him because I think the upside's there and the defense is better. The defensive matchup's better. And I'd start him ahead of McKinnon, who I think McKinnon's the better player at this point in the better offensive situation. But he's having to split time with Latavius Murray. And as a result of that, I'd prefer Barber, who I just think may wind up, it's a calculated gamble that he'll get more carries.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to characterize it. And in terms of ceiling and floor with some of these guys. And again, with Joe Mixon out, Giovanni Bernard is in this mix. He's maybe more of a high floor, low ceiling option against Minnesota just because of how the Minnesota defense is playing, how the Cincinnati offense is playing. One more injury note here, too. Tevin Coleman is out with his concussion for tomorrow night. That makes Devontae Freeman like the first round pick, automatic start, top 5 play. And it's almost like the football gods are guiding Atlanta to do what they should have been doing all along, which is really they've been searching for that offensive identity all year. Why not let Devontae Freeman be the key? be that first the jab to soften up the opponent, and then you take those shots to Julio Jones, who did have like 11 for 250 against them. Let's another the biggest injury question over the weekend was Leonard Fournette, and at least we don't have to talk in terms of what ifs because we know he's going to play. We know that Aaron Rodgers is going to play. So Matt, as the weekend went on, I originally had Aaron Rodgers, and we talked on Thursday night as well. If it's Rodgers versus Keenum, if it's Rodgers versus Breeze, Rodgers versus Stafford, these are tough calls. As the weekend went on, I got more questions about Rodgers and more opportunities to really walk down that path, that hallway. It led to Rodgers. Every time it would lead to Rodgers. I still have Rodgers below Roethlisberger, but I have him now cemented in as my number 4 quarterback this week behind Brady, Wilson, and Roethlisberger. What's your advice to folks that are weighing Rodgers against Breeze, against Keenum for this week's these games today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at this, it's about, are you playing conservative or are you playing for upside? And I think that if you're playing conservative, Breeze and Keenum are probably guys that you're going to want to consider ahead of them because the matchup is better on each side for Breeze and Keenum in terms of the defenses, the Jets and the Bengals. And you kind of know what to expect from them from that standpoint. With Rodgers, you wonder how much of them are they going to go wide open the way they do with Rodgers, when he's fully healthy, or are they going to say, we found a ground game. We're going to do things so where that we're going to run the ball more and we're going to ease Rodgers in and we're going to give him some shots to pick, just like Hundley there, and he'll do fine. And he could end up with a 200-yard, 2-touchdown game and play really well and play efficiently, but may not have that wild upside of, 300, 350 yards that you could get out of Breeze or Keenum in against teams that will probably give them some fight and will be a close enough game that both teams will have to throw the ball enough. Whereas with Rodgers against Carolina, I mean, I know that Carolina has a good defense, at least from a pass rush perspective. But this is a team that if they can run on them, this game could be, this could be an interesting game where maybe the upside isn't as great as you think. So that's kind of where I look at these guys.
Yeah, and I think and there's not a wrong answer really. There's not a clear right or wrong answer, and I think you're right to emphasize ceiling with Breeze. I mean, ceiling with Rodgers and floor with Breeze and Keenum. And speaking of Keenum, Kyle Rudolph has gone miraculous recovery from doubtful, or I think he was even reported as out on Friday. Now he's questionable. So the question becomes, uh, do we go back to Kyle Rudolph the same way we normally were going to? Like, basically, Kyle Rudolph was in that list, Matt, of 7 or 8 safe tight ends. Assuming he is active against Cincinnati without Vontaze Burfict. Last week, Adam Shaheen, who we didn't get to watch yesterday, sadly, had 4 catches and a touchdown against Cincinnati. When we weigh all these factors, do we consider Rudolph the red zone reindeer the same way we would have a week ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would. I think you got to look at him that he's a good bet for 40 to 60 yards in this game and a decent bet for a touchdown. So, I mean, it's looking at what happened to the Bengals defense, you can see how that there's an opportunity there for him to do well. And I think that his floor is high enough that you won't be extremely disappointed if he doesn't have a big upside game.
So Matt, in that same vein, whenever I saw that Kyle Rudolph was going to be out, that gave me clarity on Stephon Diggs for folks. I mean, considering the players they were saying Diggs Diggs at that point to me became a strong wide receiver too. And now we're in the striking distance of those games Diggs had occasionally in the last 2 years of, 7 for 150 and 2 touchdowns because he's that good of a player when he's facing inferior matchups. And again, the Bengals defense is depleted. Now with Rudolph potentially back in, I tap the brakes a little bit on Diggs, but Diggs kind of like Mike Davis, Matt. Diggs seems from the amount of start-sit questions and the range of players I was getting on the other side of Diggs start-sit questions this week. It's a player that I think the fantasy community is having a problem getting a handle on for this week. Can you help them get a handle on him for this week?
Yeah, I mean, I have Diggs in a league and I'm benching him, and I think it's a league we're facing again. I don't have him out there because I just simply look at the history right now, and I feel like he hasn't performed well enough to feel really confident about him in lieu of other players. So it's a, unless you're kind of in a desperate situation for your flex, he's not a guy I want to have because I think his reputation, he's more beloved by fantasy writers in this community than he is by what's actually happening on the field. It's kind of one of those situations where writers have talked about him so much and have played him up and played up his brand so much that I think that people who are following the people in his fantasy community at all sorts of sites are kind of conflicted because they're seeing the name come up all the time about how he's a good player, and they're looking at the production and they don't see the fit, and that makes it difficult and scary to have to try and make the play. But again, if you're in a situation where you're looking at, a lot of guys who are borderline wide receiver threes, then you go with the talented player on a good team. And I think that Diggs is that talented player on a good team. He's just not performing at the level that you would expect because they are, I think Keenum really has a thing for Adam Thielen, and Thielen's played great, and that run game has performed well. And so what ends up happening is that Diggs has turned into the big play guy. He's kind of the field stretcher, or he's the guy that they substitute as the run game here and there when the run game isn't working great. But here's the thing too. Offensive line in Minnesota hasn't been playing, has some injuries that they've been dealing with in the past couple of weeks. So when you think about those injuries, maybe they will use Diggs a little bit more in that short passing game. So I think again, that's kind of a pro con, and it goes for why fantasy owners are confused. I would say to you that you just consider using him as a low end wide receiver three in this scenario, and that you're looking at a guy who probably isn't going to give you that huge game because the volume's not going to be there.
Yeah, Rudolph being back, I think also complicates things for Jerick McKinnon, who we were just talking about, and actually making that adjustment if Rudolph is active could knock McKinnon out of that low running back two range, even though the matchup is so good. A lot of thorny wide receivers. Matt, I'm gonna just change gears now and step through these on a game by game basis and get some of the players that have a little more give or ones that people are going to be playing wondering about. And starting out with Buffalo, Miami. And the interesting thing here is, we get a little clarity going forward. The Chiefs just have to hold serve against Miami next week. They get Denver in week 17, but the Chiefs are in the driver's seat now to win that division after their performance last night. Buffalo, Miami, a 9-7 Buffalo or a 9-7 Miami, depending on how things shake out with Tennessee, could make the playoffs. So this Buffalo Miami game has a little more on the line than you might think, considering how we think of these teams now. Although you might argue that Miami in the last 2 weeks has been one of the best 5 teams in the NFL, partially because of Kenyon Drake. How aggressive is too aggressive for Kenyon Drake? Matt, let me just put it this way. Here are the running backs I have ahead of Kenyon Drake this week. And I will say Kareem Hunt was not ahead of Kenyon Drake in my rankings, just, in the interest of full disclosure. But I have Bell, Gurley, Ingram, Kamara, Freeman, and McCoy ahead of Drake. That's it.
Yeah.
Am I being too aggressive?
No, I think that you're probably in the right range there. I mean, you have to consider though that Buffalo, well, I'll give a counterpoint to this one. The Buffalo Bills, when you look at them recently, they've given up a good bit of yardage. So I would say it makes sense from the trend since for the past 5 weeks. This is a perfectly good call. I think this is a very good call. And you got to understand that Drake's playing really well, and Miami's knowing how to use him. He's making good cutback runs. He's certainly identifying the second crease. He's hitting it hard. And when they use him and when he's not able to improvise, or he doesn't have to improvise, the set plays they're using on him, they're basically saying hit the hole hard. And he's hitting the hole hard, and he's getting in the open space. And the Bills just seem like a team that has basically lost its will to play on the level that it had before. Now that McDermott basically screwed up the team, at least the team vibe. And I know that that's a little narrative streak for you, but I mean, again, when you take away your main leader on the field, and you put in a guy who's a rookie, and no one likes rookie quarterbacks. Veterans do not like playing with rookie quarterbacks unless they really have no other choice, and they're going to put up a good front about that. But when you're in a playoff position and you take out your starter, yeah, if you don't think that half that team's looking at McDermott with the side eye, then you haven't worked out in the real world yet. I mean, or you're living in a delusional workplace, or you're like Sean McDermott in your
Yeah,
workplace.
you're part of Team McDermott.
You're part of the problem. That people are giving you the side eye, and you haven't learned your lesson yet. So yeah, Kenyon Drake is a perfectly good start at this stage, and I see him as a mid-range running back one.
New Orleans and the Jets. There's not that much to talk about here. We're staying away from everybody in the Jets offense, period. I woe is you if you have to have a question that you're asking one of us this morning. Do I start Robbie Anderson or do I start?
I do have one that I might do over just as a way, and this is maybe a little while, but I still think that Bryce Petty can find Robbie Anderson. He did last year, and Robbie Anderson over Diggs. I could consider that one.
Consider that.
But that's about it, and that's risky.
And that's really risky. Well, I just wonder if Marshawn Lattimore is going to be on Robbie Anderson. But I mean, all it takes is one pass in garbage time. So you're right. We could look back and say, no, that was a little bit overreaching. Anderson's good. Ted Ginn's going to be out, and I'm asking this one for folks in these crazy deep 16 team roster. 3 wide receiver with 2 flex. Just really quick, and this is just a chance for you to give us like a 30-second take if you prefer, because on one Tommy Lee Lewis, is there a chance that if Ted Ginn is out for the next couple weeks, is there a chance that Tommy Lee Lewis is an interesting player? And then we start to look ahead to next year where Ted Ginn hasn't exactly clicked in this offense the way that they might have envisioned. Is there something there? Because I love this part of the season, Matt, for late season deep dynasty evaluation. And I feel like Tommy Lee Lewis should be on our list for that.
I mean, he could very well be. I mean, he's certainly a guy that he offers just as much, if not more, in the open field as Ginn. And he's he's got that great stop-start quickness. So he's someone that if you can get him in the space with the ball in his hand, he can do really well. But I think Ginn is the superior player against contact. He's a superior player over the middle. And I think that they've made some timely throws to him over the middle. They just haven't needed him as much as that they did, because they have Alvin Kamara and they've got Mark Ingram pounding the ball. So this is a more balanced offense. And I just think that that's part of it more than anything. I think Tommy Lee Lewis, though, you got to understand that they still go to Brandon Coleman. There's still a lot of Michael Thomas. Kamara is back. You're right to frame it as a 16-team league, deep bench, deep roster type of thing. If you start 5 receivers and you need a 5th receiver, I could see his upside there, maybe even as a 4th receiver. But I think that he is basically a 1 or 2 target player this week.
Yeah, chances are those touches go to Kamara and Ingram, as you said. It makes them even better plays. Tennessee's going to San Francisco. So we have some players on the Tennessee side. I mean, at this point, Matt, I'm saying extreme prejudice against a Tennessee running back. Even against San Francisco, this is a different San Francisco team with Jimmy Garoppolo. It's a competitive San Francisco team. Extreme prejudice against the running backs. I mean, Delaney Walker is one of those tight ends we can trust. Extreme prejudice against Marcus Mariota. He's underperformed expectations again and again and again this year. Rashard Matthews is the only player that I'm even considering here, but despite how good the matchup looks on paper, if you look at the personnel of the San Francisco defense, I guess I'm just very gun shy when it comes to playing anybody in the Tennessee offense other than Delaney Walker. Do you want to make a case to the contrary?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a small case just because when you look at the teams in recent weeks where Garoppolo's played, I mean, we'll look at this from the standpoint of last team was Houston. They played Houston and they played Chicago. Right. And I know that Jordan Howard disappointed in that game, but teams that actually had some semblance of quarterback play and some commitment to the ground game performed really well against them. On certain, or not really well. I would say middle of the road to good would be the level there. And I just think that when you look at this team, this is a middle of the road running game, but it's got talent on it. And so I'd say that they're kind of middle of the road team. They're running back 3 material to me, and that's basically it. And you know, that is definitely a drop off from what expectations were. So I agree with you on that aspect. I don't know if I would avoid them at all costs. You know, again, if you have DeMarco Murray or Jerick McKinnon, you have, you know, DeMarco Murray or Samaje Perine, you might find that Murray might actually still be the better play than those two guys. It'll be close, and maybe those other guys have more upside, but I don't think it's that much more upside when you consider if you know, they play well enough in Tennessee, this could be a close game, and you could see Murray getting some touchdowns out of this.
I just see a game like I see a game more like you mentioned the Chicago San Francisco game, and you mentioned, and then we have the Arizona Tennessee game last week. Both of those games were very low score. It was 15-14, I think, Chicago and San Fran, and that was with Kareem Cohen returning a punt for a touchdown.
But are we ready to put Mariota in the same tier as Mitchell Trubisky
And he's been playing like Mitchell Trubisky.
and Savage? I mean, has he really? I guess so. I mean,
and he's been playing just like Mitchell Trubisky, like just occasional misfires for no discernible reason. I mean, he has better players around him, but you know, either way,
Yeah.
Arizona's a good defense. Arizona's not a shutdown defense, and Mariota just looks. He just, I mean, this offense it's like watching a harness race. You ever watch the harness races, man? I know you go to the track. You know how you watch the harness race and a horse will like get off stride and you'll see it fall back from the pack.
Yeah.
That's been the Tennessee offense, and that's just how I feel about them right now. Where just project them to come in under expectations. And I also
see that.
I probably have a strong rooting interest in San Francisco. I just don't want Tennessee to make the AFC bracket. San Fran would do. San Fran again. Zach Law, Tennessee fans, we love you, and I don't want to.
The truth is out.
But I want to see an AFC bracket with. Well, I don't know. I guess now that the Chargers are falling off, though, who's the team? I mean, is it going to be Buffalo or Miami? Oh man. Okay, maybe not. Maybe I'll back off of that. Okay, one player I've gotten a decent amount of questions out about, Matt, but I just haven't been recommending, and maybe this is my Week 15 Harry Carey, you know, seppuku moment right now that you see a preview of. I have not been finding myself recommending Carlos Hyde, which feels kind of weird in a sense because we know Carlos Hyde's a badass. However, in this new template for the 49ers offense, Matt Breida has been getting it's been like a 60-40 kind of thing with the high volume of snaps and the tempo. Carlos Hyde is not getting a large volume of dump offs anymore. TJ Beathard knew how to do that. Jimmy Garoppolo knows how to do more than that. And Tennessee's run defense is good. They have not given up more than 76 yards to any running back this year. And running backs have been getting volume against them, you know, or 77. J.H.I. got 25 carries, 77 yards. You know, Isaiah Crowell, 17-35. Alex Collins, 13-43. Even Le'Veon Bell, 12 for 46. Frank Gore, 17 for 62. Lamar Miller, 15 for 56. Last week, it was only Kerwin Williams, but it was 20 for 73. If this defense has a strength, it's the running game. And I think it's going to be more of a Jimmy Garoppolo day than a Carlos Hyde day. And I don't know that I've recommended Carlos Hyde in one start-sit question this week. You know, it's all those running backs we've been talking about at the top of the show. I'm recommending them all over Carlos Hyde. Do you want to be the one to save people from my foolishness here and say there is a case for Carlos Hyde in your lineup this week?
I'm having a tough time as well because I have a team where I've got Carlos Hyde as my running back 3, and my options at this stage, let me look at them real quick. My options at this stage, I could start Marquise Goodwin. I could start Cooper Kupp. I could start Robert Woods in a PPR league. Oh. I could start Mike Davis, you know? And you know,
fifth out of five.
I'm trying to figure out why I'm starting Carlos Hyde. Like, I'm looking at it and I'm going, it's past info. So like now I'm trying to decide between all those guys because you know, it's basically a scenario where, you know, the Woods Kupp dynamic is weird because it's like, do I get upside from Kupp, you know, this week because of Woods coming back, or does Woods coming back hurt Kupp? Do I go with Goodwin because he's been hot, you know, with this particular scenario? Or do I go with Davis, who's might be the safest play, you know, out of this scenario? And that's the tough part because, you know, I think Carlos Hyde, the argument for Carlos Hyde is this. If you feel like you just want your 8 to 12 points, and get out of there and know that you're going to get 8 to 12 points. I don't think Carlos Hyde's going to hurt you on that level. I think in a PPR league, 8 to 12 points, even though he didn't see the targets he's seen before, he did have a deep pass that he just slowed down a little bit for that could have been a long touchdown for him last week. But he's still getting between 15 to 17 carries per game, somewhere in that range. And I think that at worst, he's going to get you 10 to 12 touches, 40 to 60 yards, and give you a shot at a touchdown in the red area. But I think that's again, there's so many other players with more upside there. So if you're just scared not to play him, you're going to get okay points from him, but the upside is unlikely for him to have. He's had one 100-yard day this whole year, and it was against Seattle in week 2 for 124 yards. Otherwise, he's given you basically between, 30 and 60 yards most of the time, and then maybe 80 to 100 total yards. And that, like you said, before they stopped using him in the passing game in the past couple of weeks, where the passing games, it's been limited on that level, the amount of times that they've checked down. The only thing is that the linebackers in Tennessee give up a lot of points in the passing game. So Garoppolo may check down a little bit more often, but Derek Morgan's hurt. So are they really going to be able to rush the passer on a level where Garoppolo is going to need to check down? So yeah, I think they're a better place.
Yeah, if Carlos Hyde has 150 yards and 2 touchdowns, like, he's a badass. Why did I tell people to bench a badass for somebody like, Chris Ivory? But
well, he is a badass, but the team hasn't made him a badass.
No.
So how do you got to look at that on that same level. It's kind of like the Kareem Hunt thing, good for Kareem Hunt owners that he's played well. And like a couple weeks ago, I was like, okay, he's a conditional starter. You can move him back in your lineups if you're feeling this way because the matchup still has some iffy things. But if you're going to treat him like a running back 2, who's going to give you running back 1 upside, you're good to go. But if you're basing it on recent past history, you look at it and go, I need proof that the line is going to play well enough for him to do well. And this is one of those scenarios.
We haven't seen it. Yeah. Okay. So we got just like 12 minutes before the end of the hour. So we'll go into kind of lightning round, and we can really look at this like in like cold, cool, lukewarm, warm, hot, as far as how you're feeling about these players. Some players that and I may be a little bit redundant with what we talked about Thursday night for those of you in our Thursday night crowd. I apologize. But let's step through some other players that the folks might be struggling with this morning. Okay. We talked about Jacksonville and Houston extensively because of Chris Ivory, and we've talked about D.D. Westbrook, and I think we can both agree that you and I are both like warm to hot on him this week compared to what your expectations would be. We haven't talked a lot about Marquise Lee. Marquise Lee seems like that par. He's going to get 5 for 60, probably not a lot more, but certainly it seems unlikely he would get a lot less. Do you want to add some accents or flavor to what you think about Marquise Lee for this week?
Yeah, I think it's just, you look at this situation, and Houston's vulnerable over the middle of the field, so they run a lot of crossing routes to Lee. So he's no worse than a 65-degree day to me, which is pretty nice.
There you go. Yeah, pleasant. We've talked extensively about Cincinnati and Minnesota. We've talked about Giovanni Bernard. We've talked about all the Minnesota options. I think we can turn the page from that game. Baltimore and Cleveland. And I have Alex Collins slotted in right below Kenyon Drake, but I would contend at this point, based on those last 4 weeks, based on the matchup, based on how he's playing, Alex Collins is a running back 1 for fantasy leagues. He is a top 10, top 12 running back option. Are you ready to anoint him?
No, I think so. Yeah, it's an 80-degree day for him. I think you're going to look at that, and that despite the fact that Cleveland has statistically some good looking data from their run defense, I think that you have to understand that this is a team that Collins has run the ball well against a variety of opponents, and they've done it without Marshall Yanda. Imagine when Marshall Yanda comes back next year, and if Kenneth Dixon doesn't come out really, really hot and pose some level of competition, if Alex Smith, if Alex Collins plays the level that he's capable of, like he has right now, and takes that job, he could be a running back 1 all year next year.
What an interesting story in hindsight too. That really, and there may be another chapter in Thomas Rawls' career. I don't know, but really, the Seahawks just were wasting their time with Eddie Lacy and Thomas Rawls. And if they had cut them both and kept Alex Collins, who was impressive in training camp in the preseason, imagine if they had a backfield going forward of Carson Davis, and then San Francisco foolishly left Davis unprotected. So that, that balanced it out a little bit, losing Collins, getting Davis. But
I just think, Alex Collins reminds me of another back who they let go, but it's because of DUI issues. His name was Spencer Ware. So, Collins and Ware are very similar backs. And when you look at the way that they play, they're both quicker than fast. They both have really good feet. They both know how to run through contact, and they can catch the ball. And they really liked Ware, but he got in enough trouble that they couldn't keep him on the roster. And remember, that was when Marshawn Lynch was beasting. They were still putting Ware in at the end of games, and they said, we're putting him in as fullback to keep him, but we like him as a running back. And so I think Collins, it's sad because JD McKissick basically beat out Alex Collins because of his play. They wanted to keep McKissick over Collins in this scenario, and they made the wrong call.
Yeah. What about making the right call when it comes to? And I'm gonna lump these guys together, but you can tease them out. Baltimore and Cleveland game. Josh Gordon, Corey Coleman, and DeShone Kizer. And I look at all three of them, and I want to say, be optimistic. Look to optimism here as we see the petals of the flower opening on a vertical pass offense, and it only takes one play for either of these guys. And it feels like the kind of game. Strange that if DeShone Kizer can, and I know that you have had a little bit more pessimism about Kizer, but now that we're here, and I know you want to see Cleveland hang with the old Cleveland, you want to see them give them a black eye and keep them from getting in the playoffs. But do you actually think it can happen?
Actually, I kind of don't, sad to say. I'd actually like to see the Baltimore Ravens win this game just because I
Oh,
I think
exercise Jimmy Haslam and company.
I would. I don't believe that this team is, I believe this team is like a demon spirit that has possessed the city. And the fans are acting crazy as a result of it too. So, I mean, when you look at it, I honestly think that I think Kaiser's getting a raw deal from the fans and from a lot of analysts. He's a young player who, basically you would have liked to have seen him sit for a year, I think. And you're seeing a lot of things that are happening are a result of him trying too hard to do things that he shouldn't do and overthinking things. And that's part and parcel with a young player, in this type of a situation. So you look at it from that standpoint. I'm not as optimistic about Kizer because dealing with pressure, he can, certain types of pressure he steps up and plays well, but I think his game's deteriorated enough that he's not doing a good job in the way that he did in the preseason and he did at Notre Dame. But I think he's good, just good enough that you're going to get, probably 55-degree day out of Corey Coleman, and I think an 80-degree day out of Gordon. I think Gordon's going to have a big week still.
Definitely Gordon is the guy that if you're on the fence, break ties in favor of Gordon, without a doubt. I mean, how much, or do you, on one hand, do you move in your consideration a guy like Alshon Jeffrey or Zach Ertz if you're considering him as a flexor? You've had tough tight end decisions. Well, when they weren't tough, you're playing Ertz every week, but does it become tough? Or do you still say treat Jeffrey and Ertz the same way you did last week, the week before, the week before, the week before, because it's the Giants?
Yeah, I think you treat him as before. I think people are overthinking the Nick Foles thing. I mean, yeah, he's he's not a starter long term for anybody, but he's a good enough player that he's going to step right in. And the way this offense is played, I know everyone loves Carson Wentz, and I think he's a terrific player, but people get really butthurt over the idea that Carson Wentz has some limitations and that they've worked to put him into situations to make him an even better player than what he was last year. And Nick Foles actually works very nicely into that mix and with some of the same problems. So I think that the offense and the offensive design is really going to be the reason why you start Nick Foles and why Alshon Jeffrey is a fine play and why Ertz is a good play. And I would be pretty warm to hot on them.
So this is a player that, perhaps you may just shut down this kind of talk right away, Matt, and say, I don't think it's a debate. I think that in week 15, in a fantasy playoff game, if you have a decision between this player and another player, unless it's a really compelling name, I'm not benching him. Or you might say, well, you look at the surroundings, you look at this team traveling east, you look at their quarterback Blaine Gabbert, and maybe the right answer is to bench Larry Fitzgerald. And I'll give you, just to add a little flavor to this question, Matt. In my rankings, some of the players around Larry Fitzgerald are Marquise Goodwin and Cooper Kupp and Dede Westbrook and Devin Funches and Marquise Lee. Um, what do you think about Larry Fitzgerald this week?
I guess when, from that standpoint, Larry Fitzgerald to me is a guy that it's hard to bench him, but at the same time, I see him as a wide receiver 3,
Yeah.
and at a low end one. So, it's not uh, if you have Marquise Lee, I might start Marquise Lee over Larry Fitzgerald, though the aesthetic side of football part of me wants to slap me for saying that. That's from a fantasy standpoint, it's true.
It is, because if you're talking about the one expectation potential that you would regret benching Fitzgerald is if he gets that 11 catch for 100-yard kind of game, which is
Yeah.
possible. It's possible, but it's still only one. It's a 10 or 20% high end range of possibilities, and you need Washington's offense to play well, and you need this game to open up, because as I said, in these games between two teams that are playing for nothing, they can be typified. They can be a close game typified by offensive futility or defensive futility. And I don't think, based on how Arizona's defense is playing and how Arizona's been playing as a team in general, it will be, unless you buy into this traveling east. But they traveled east before. They faced Detroit and they faced Philly, and Washington is not that team right now. Washington's not that team that's going to be. We saw Washington just blitzkrieg Oakland earlier this year. That's not this. That's not the Washington team. We have a Washington team that's just dragging itself to the finish line at this point. There's so many angles to the Steelers and New England game. Juju Smith-Schuster's a little banged up, so maybe you're not inclined to go with him. But Martavis Bryant hasn't been playing well. Maybe you're not inclined to go with him. Actually, Jesse James with Vance McDonald out, I think it's a real interesting guy if you have to pick up your tight end from the waiver wire to go with. But I do want to ask you about Chris Hogan in this one, because we have one catch from him last week. We have him coming back off of a layoff. We have, on the other hand, he had 9 for 180 and 2 touchdowns against the Steelers in the AFC title game last year. It's going to be really interesting. Joe Hayden's going to play for this one, so I think that does encourage the Steelers a little bit more to go with blitzing, go with more pressure, play man coverage, which when it was last year in the playoffs, it was Chris Hogan just tearing up his own defense. So, and use this to jump off to anybody you want in this game, because really the marquee game, the Steelers. Yeah. Yeah. I want to flex. Is Chris Hogan going to flex?
I mean, I think that the situation, it still feels risky to play Chris Hogan, even though I think from a schematic standpoint, the way you set it up makes sense. More man defense means more Chris Hogan, more opportunities for him downfield. But I found it interesting that last week you would think that would have been the case, and Tom Brady was inexplicably going to Brandon Cooks like someone on a bender. I mean, it was just like it was really out of character for the way that they were playing. So does that say that Chris Hogan wasn't quite ready yet? Does it mean, we don't know. We can't speculate about his health. We have no idea what's going on from that scenario. But with Gronkowski back, now that Gronkowski's back, who's going to match up with him? I mean, like, I don't really see anybody matching up with him. He's the guy I'd be more concerned about than Hogan. Hogan may get some. I look at Hogan as kind of like he may give you some cheap, good fantasy points there, but I'm shying away from him more often than I'm starting him in scenarios, just because I just think that this team also is a little more vulnerable to the run now that you've got Shazier out.
Dion Lewis, maybe. So that's a question. Let's go like a minute or two over, because I want to touch on. I just want to give you a chance to weigh in on one last game we haven't talked about quite yet. But so we know Gronk's going to get his, and maybe Gronk has 150 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, really,
Yeah,
that's
I
not
think he does.
outlandish.
I think he has a big game.
So, but it is who has the number 2 big game for this team?
Dion Lewis. I think it's Dion Lewis. I think part of it is that he's the best running back on the Patriots. I'm sorry. I know everyone talks about Burkhead, and Burkhead's good, and Burkhead's playing well, but Dion Lewis up the middle on this team, I think they're going to be vulnerable up the middle, and I think you're going to see Lewis gash them over and over again, and it looks like he's going to be, he's going to think he's playing,
On his college field again. He's playing for
yeah,
the Pitt Panthers as a
like he's playing
superstar
North
again.
Carolina again,
Yeah.
or something at home. I think it's going to be a homecoming for him, and he and Gronkowski are going to have big weeks, and I would feel very comfortable with them.
Last one, I want just a parting shot as your team, your adopted team, Seattle Seahawks, with the Rams coming to town. And let's be real about this one. This is basically a playoff game for Seattle. If you like to play with those playoff simulators, I was messing around with one on Friday. If Seattle loses this game, their path to the playoffs gets a lot tougher. I mean, they do face Dallas, so they get to face one of the teams that they're going to be competing with. But still, they should be. Pete Carroll's been through this rodeo many times. He knows that this is a game they have to treat as a playoff game. At home, what do we see? Any fantasy angles you want to give to anybody, as you know this team so well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're going to look at here is, I mean, Seattle's been doing the same thing they've been doing pretty much all year, which is, throwing the ball a heck of a lot, and you're just going to hope that, um, that the pressure doesn't get to Russell Wilson enough in terms of, early on, and that early mistakes don't hurt them. I think that's the problem here, is that there's a high likelihood of Russell Wilson making a mistake in the first quarter or in the first half, one or two mistakes that result in a Rams lead, and then you're going to see the Rams be able to play in a situation where that they can take control of this game. And so for me, I look at this and I think that, Goff is a decent start as a low end quarterback one. I think Gurley remains a very strong start. You got to look at him still as a top 5 player. The receivers become a little bit more problematic because, with Woods coming back, Woods to me is a guy that's capable of giving you top 5 production from the standpoint of PPR leagues. But are you going to put him in that right away? Kind of like the Chris Hogan deal,
Cup over Woods, right? Cup over Woods.
I think Cup over Woods,
and probably Watkins over Woods.
I would say Cup over Woods and Woods over Watkins. But I think it's a tough one to call. I mean, like, I'm looking at Cup and Goodwin right now, and I'm probably starting Goodwin because of just the fact
so tight.
It's that tight. But I think that, then you go look on the Seattle side of the ball, and I think that, the cornerbacks are a little banged up on the Rams side of the ball. They've had some injuries on it coming on and off the field. So I think Baldwin's in for a big day. I think Richardson's a good bet for you. Lockett still can do some things for you. And of course, you've got Graham, who, is
you go back to him, even after the goose egg. You go back to him this week.
Yeah, Wilson to me is a guy that's like, I know they don't usually play well against the Rams. They haven't over the years, but to me, Wilson has the most upside of any quarterback in this week, with the exception of maybe Brady and Roethlisberger. Those three are neck and neck to me, and I think that Wilson's the guy who has the higher floor of all of them.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And we won't wind this up. I've got a last thing, Matt. Late breaking news. Marvin Lewis says, "Fired? I'm not fired. I quit." Do you have any? Well, he says at the end of the season he quits. Do you have any announcements to make before we wind up our Week 15 Sunday morning hangout?
No, after that, I'm looking forward to seeing if I'll see him again at the Senior Bowl like I do every year. And he looks at me and goes, he looks at me and sees me, and I can see the look on his face like, I've seen you before and I have no idea why. Like, so
you're the guy that was saying I should have been playing Cedric Pearman all along. It's you. Everyone keeps taking these reports to me from some guy, Matt Waldman, that's telling me Cedric Pearman is the best running back on my roster.
There we go. That's what'll happen. Cedric Pearman is he on IR right now? I think he's on IR. I think he's going to come off IR and suddenly, Week magically, and post a 17 for 170 3-touchdown game.
Avenge. There you go. Well, hopefully everybody out there avenges. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Magical
with their 40 times. At the combine, magical realism thinking from certain reporters out there in the blogosphere.
Well, I think magical thinking is a wonderful way to get some excitement out of fantasy football, and I think that when we all avenge our previous losses, and I know between the two of us in at least one of our leagues, one of us will be in the finals. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully you're at least having one team alive in the finals next week. We will be back next week doing our thing, and no, we're not going to quit. We're not going to get fired. We're going to be here for you all the way because you're so classy.